Lingue originali.
Ultimo appuntamento di Lingue Originali, episodio dedicato alla letteratura in lingua inglese, dedicato a Roald Dahl e alle sue storie sorprendenti, Tales of the Unexpected. Da questa raccolta, di cui già vi ho detto molto nell'introduzione agli episodi precedenti, stiamo leggendo The Bookseller, titolo originale che ho sempre tradotto letteralmente, il libraio. In realtà la casa editrice Wanda pubblica in Italia la versione italiana di questo racconto, il cui titolo in italiano però è Il libraio che imbrogliò l'Inghilterra. Titolo che probabilmente rende meglio l'idea di quella che sia la trama. Non ve l'ho ancora svelata. Qualche tratto ve lo fornisco oggi, rimandandovi poi all'edizione italiana, se vorrete andarla ad acquistare nella vostra libreria. Protagonista, Mr. Baggage. È il proprietario di una libreria antiquaria di Londra. Ha un assistente che, guardate un po', è anche la sua amante e con lei trascorre gran parte della giornata nel retrobottega. E già qui svelo a chi arrivasse soltanto oggi ad ascoltarci che si tratta di una storia un po' pruriginosa. Una storia pruriginosa in linea con quello humor inglese declinato alla maniera di Roald Dahl, sorprendente come le sue storie, dissacrante, grottesco, aggiungo io ambiguo. Allora, gli affari di questa libreria vanno decisamente bene, al punto che un giorno i due collaboratori amanti decidono di concedersi una vacanza in Marocco. Ma mica una vacanzina così, scendono in alberghi di gran tono perché possono permetterselo. Ma perché possono spendere così tanto? Non perché siano due bravissimi librai, ma sono un po' truffaldini. La descrizione dell'edizione italiana non ci spiega il perché, ma io ve lo dico perché vado ad attingere alle note all'edizione originale. C'è una vedova che i nostri Baggage e la sua assistente, Miss Total, si chiama così, decidono di truffare. La ricattano. Più che altro la truffano. In pratica ci sarebbe una storia torbida a carico del marito scomparso di questa signora, il quale, secondo i due, secondo la trama che tessono per truffare questa signora, avrebbe acquistato delle riviste pornografiche in libreria e quindi mandano a questa signora delle fatture che non sono false di per sé, ma non c'è scopo per mandarle questi solleciti di pagamento se non quello di guadagnare illecitamente. Nel prossimo episodio di Lingue Originali dedicato alla letteratura in lingua inglese faremo un gran riepilogo di quanto avete ascoltato e vi abbiamo raccontato in questi 6 episodi dedicati a The Bookseller, che vi ricordo essere tratto dalla raccolta Tales of the Unexpected di Roald Dahl. Ancora una volta linea e microfono a Marco Piovaz.
Right, Miss Trottle said, running the notepaper out of the typewriter. Done that one. But you realize I don't have my Bible here, so I'll have to check the names when I get home before posting the letters. You do that, Mr. Buggage said. Miss Tottle's Bible was a massive index card file in which were recorded the names and addresses of every client they had written to since the beginning of the business. The purpose of this was to try as nearly as possible to ensure that no two members of the same family received a baggage invoice. If this were to happen, there would always be the danger that they might compare notes. It also served to guard against a case where a widow who had received one invoice upon the death of her first husband might be sent another invoice on the death of the second husband. That, of course, would let the cat right out of the bag. There was no guaranteed way of avoiding this perilous mistake, because the widow would have changed her name when she remarried. But Miss Tottle had developed an instinct for sniffing out such pitfalls, and the Bible helped her to do it. "What's next?" Miss Tottle asked. "The next is Major General Lionel Anstruther. Here he is. Got about 6 inches in who's who. Clubs, Army and Navy. Recreations, riding, 2 wounds. I suppose he fell off a horse and broke his flipping neck," Miss Tottle said. "I'll start with Memoirs of Fox Hunting Man, 1st edition, right?" "Right, 220 quid, Mr. Buggage said, "and make it between 500 and 600 altogether." "OK. And put in the sting of the riding crop. Whips seem to come natural to these fox-hunting folk." The holiday in Marrakesh continued pleasantly enough, and 9 days later Mr. Buggage and Miss Tottle were back in the office in Charing Cross Road, both with sun-scorched skins as red as the shells of the many lobsters they had eaten. They quickly settled down again into their normal and stimulating routine. Day after day the letters went out and the checks came in. It was remarkable how smoothly the business ran. The psychology behind it was, of course, very sound. Strike a widow at the height of her grief, strike her with something that is unbearably awful, something she wants to forget about and put behind her, something she wants nobody else to discover. What's more, the funeral is imminent, so she pays up fast to get the sordid little business out of the way. Mr. Buggage knew his onions. In all the years he had been operating, he had never once had a protest or an angry reply. Just a check in an envelope. Now and again, but not often, there was no reply at all. The disbelieving widow had been brave enough to sling his letter into the waste paper basket, and that was the end of it. None of them quite dared to challenge the invoice, because they could never be absolutely positive that the late husband had been as pure as the wife believed and hoped. Men never are. In many cases, of course, the widow knew very well that her beloved had been a literous old bird, and Mr. Buggage's invoice came as no surprise, so she paid up even faster. About a month after their return from Marrakesh, on a wet and rainy afternoon in March, Mr. Buggage was reclining comfortably in his office with his feet up on the top of his fine partner's desk, dictating to Miss Tottle some details about a deceased and distinguished admiral. "Recreations," he was saying, reading from Who's Who, "gardening, sailing and stamp collecting." At that point, the door from the main shop opened and a young man came in with a book in his hand. "Mr. Buggage," he said. Mr. Luggage looked up. "Over there," he said, waving towards Miss Tottle. "She'll deal with you." The young man stood still. His navy blue overcoat was wet from the weather, and droplets of water were dripping from his hair. He didn't look at Miss Tottle. he kept his eyes on Mr. Baggage. "Don't you want the money?" he said pleasantly enough. "She'll take it." "Why won't you take it?" "Because she's the cashier," Mr. Baggage said. "You want to buy a book? Go ahead. She'll deal with you." "I'd rather deal with you," the young man said. Mr. Baggage looked up at him. "Go on," he said. "Just do as you're told. There's a good lad." "You are the proprietor," the young man said. "You are Mr. William Baggage." "What if I am?" Mr. Baggage said, his feet still up on the desk. "Are you or aren't you?" "What's it to you?" Mr. Baggage said. "So that's settled," the young man said. "How do you do, Mr. Baggage?" There was a curious edge to his voice now, a mixture of scorn and mockery. Mr. Baggage took his feet down from the desktop and sat up a trifle straighter. "You're a bit of a cheeky young bugger, aren't you?" he said. "If you want that book, I suggest you just pay your money over there and then you can op it, right?" The young man turned towards the still open door that led to the front of the shop. Just the other side of the door, there were a couple of the usual kind of customers, men in raincoats, pulling out books and examining them. "Mother," the young man called softly. "You can come in, Mother. Mr. Baggage is here." A small woman of about 60 came in and stood beside the young man. She had a trim figure for her age, and a face that must once have been ravishing, but now it showed traces of strain and exhaustion, and the pale blue eyes were dulled with grief. She was wearing a black coat and a simple black hat. She left the door open behind her. "Mr. Baggage," the young man said, "this is my mother, Mrs. Northcote." Miss Tottle, the rememberer of names, turned round quick and looked at Mr. Baggage and made little warning movements with her mouth. Mr. Baggage got the message and said as politely as he could, "And what can I do for you, ma'am?" The woman opened her black handbag and took out a letter. She unfolded it carefully and held it out to Mr. Baggage. "Then it will be you who sent me this," she said. Mr. Baggage took the letter and examined it at some length. Miss Tottle, who had turned right round in her right chair now, was watching Mr. Baggage. "Yes," Mr. Baggage said, "this is my letter and my invoice. All correct and in order. What is your problem, ma'am?" "What I came here to ask you," the woman said, "is, are you sure it's right?" "I'm afraid it is, ma'am." "But it's so unbelievable. I find it impossible to believe that my husband bought those books." "Let's see now. Your husband, Mr. Northcote," Miss Tottle said. "Yes, Mr. Northcote. Yes, of course, Mr. Northcote. He wasn't in here often, once or twice a year maybe, but a good customer and a very fine gentleman. May I offer you, ma'am, my sincere condolences on your sad loss?" "Thank you, Mr. Baggage. But are you really quite certain you haven't been mixing him up with somebody else?" "Not a chance, ma'am. Not the slightest chance. My good secretary over there will confirm that there is no mistake." "May I see it?" Miss Tottle said, getting up and crossing to take the letter from Mr. Baggage. "Yes," she said, examining it. "I typed this myself. There is no mistake." "Miss Tottle has been with me a long time," Mr. Baggage said. "She knows the business inside out. I can't remember her ever making a mistake." "I should hope not," Miss Tottle said. "So there you are, ma'am." Mr. Buggage said. It simply isn't possible, the woman said. Ah, but men will be men, Mr. Buggage said. They all have their little bit of fun now and again, and there's no harm in that, is there, Mum? He sat confident and unmoved in his chair, waiting now to have done with it. He felt himself master of the situation. The woman stood very straight and still, and she was looking Mr. Buggage directly in the eyes. "These curious books you list on your invoice," she said, "do you print them in Braille?" "In what?" "In Braille." "I don't know what you're talking about, Ma'am." "I thought you wouldn't," she said. "That's the only way my husband could have read them. He lost his sight in the last war, in the Battle of Alamein, more than 40 years ago, and he was blind forever after." The office became suddenly very quiet. The mother and her son stood motionless, watching Mr. Buggage. Miss Tottle turned away and looked out of the window. Mr. Buggage cleared his throat, as though to say something, but thought better of it. The two men in raincoats, who were close enough to have heard every word through the open door, came quietly into the office. One of them held out a plastic card and said to Mr. Buggage, "Inspector Richards, Serious Crimes Division, Scotland Yard." And to Miss Tottle, who was already moving back towards her desk, he said, "Don't touch any of those papers, please, miss. Leave everything just where it is. You're both coming along with us." The son took his mother gently by the arm and led her out of the office, through the shop and onto the street.
Tales of the Unexpected di Roald Dahl. Io vi ho spesso dato come traduzione italiana del titolo di questa raccolta Le storie sorprendenti, ma l'edizione italiana pubblicata in Italia da Tea, trovate un'edizione tascabile del 2014, è Storie Impreviste. Dalle Storie Impreviste di Roald Dahl, con Marco Piovaz abbiamo scelto The Bookseller, il libraio, traduzione originale, mentre l'edizione in lingua italiana pubblicata questa volta, attenzione, da Guanda, si intitola Il libraio che imbrogliò l'Inghilterra, e nell'introduzione vi ho spiegato perché. Questo era il sesto episodio, nonché il sesto estratto da questo racconto, col quale chiudiamo questa parentesi lunga 6 episodi dedicata alle storie di Roald Dahl, queste storie impreviste o sorprendenti, ricordatelo come vi è più semplice. Avremo altri 2 episodi da dedicare a una storia che non vi abbiamo ancora raccontato, ma il prossimo lo dedicheremo a un riepilogo, tanto per dare a chi ci raggiungerà soltanto in quell'occasione il quadro d'insieme, no? Tutte le informazioni su Tales of the Unexpected di Roald Dahl, quanto per riascoltare alcuni estratti, se non tutti, chi lo sa, proveremo a sorprendervi. Lingue originali. Questa è la seconda stagione che ormai si avvia al termine, con 3 episodi ogni settimana, tutti in uscita nel weekend, il venerdì, il sabato e la domenica alle ore 22. Il primo della settimana è proprio quello con il nostro Marco Piovaz, dedicato alla letteratura in lingua inglese, seguito da quello con Nadia Meroni per la letteratura in lingua tedesca, e da quello dedicato alla letteratura in lingua francese con la nostra Barbara Marchand. Da Dario Albertini, che cura l'introduzione per facilitare chi non è così pratico con la lingua inglese e tedesca, l'introduzione ai primi 2 episodi che ho citato. Vi ringrazio per l'ascolto, appuntamento al prossimo episodio di Lingue Originali su Caffè Italia.
Lingue originali.